This is the moment. We are the movement. We are the dreamers, becoming the doers. Standing at the beginnings of an evolution. When I look in your eyes, I can see the future. Revolution's never perfect, but it's worth it. We gon' cultivate the culture from the dirt. Yeah, it's hard to be a leader, but the fearless go first. I came to meet the words with the work. It's time to be the power, time to be the change. I'ma light the torch, I'ma carry the flame. And we can be the spark of a trail blazing. Let's go. Yeah. It's time to take ownership in the poetry. Rewriting the narrative and controlling it. Time to pass the pen to another hand. Cause power's the power to let go of it. Standing in the mirror facing my reflection. Trying to see it clearer so I ask questions. How can I be the action? How can I be the message? How can I be a step in the right direction? In the right direction. It's time to be the power. Time to be the change. I'ma light the torch. I'ma carry the flame. And we can be the spark of a trail blazing. Yeah. Let's go. It starts right here. It starts right now. It starts with me from the inside out. Cause we can be the spark of a trail blazing. We can be the spark of a trail blazing. The time is now.
Good morning. How's that for energy at 9 o'clock in the morning? Woo. You're welcome for that burst of energy. It's really great to be here. So we, as the video showed, we're here to talk about content for change. And for us, it's this whole idea that culture has the ability to transform storytelling. And so we know that media interacts and intersects with minds in good ways and bad ways, and in ways that we have yet to understand. And so we also know that as content creators, as content curators, we have a responsibility to ensure that we always take action in that regard. And that's standing in the good stories, the diverse and inclusive stories, but that's also recognizing that sometimes the content in the media falls short, and being in that space of being comfortable, being uncomfortable, and dissecting what that looks like. And so for us, that's what Content for Change is all about. It's a manifestation of that journey. Sometimes things are great and on point, and sometimes we have an opportunity to do better. It was started by BET in 2020, and Melissa and I are on a journey to take it across the entire Paramount suite of brands to really counteract racist narratives and biases that exist within media. So with that, let's do some conversation.
Great.
All right. So Melissa, I actually would love to start with you.
Yeah.
This whole idea that culture can transform storytelling. First of all, do you believe it?
I do.
And second of all, tell us a bit about the culture orientation work that you've been working on at MTV.
Yeah. Well, Crystal, when we talk about storytelling, transforming culture, this man right here was one of the first folks that really illuminated that for me. Kevin on season 1 for The Real World, I remember being a young girl, and you were the first example of a young, strong black male that I saw on television. But with that, I did also see a stereotypical depiction, now knowing the whole you that was told at the time, the tropes, the angry black male, the arrogance that was portrayed. And we all know we are so much more than our worst moments. We are also so much more than things that may trigger us to have certain reactions. And that was the small depiction that was painted of Kevin at the time, 30 plus years ago. So now with the culture orientation at MTV, we recognize after 2020 being a hell of a year that we are at the forefront and continue to be of pop culture in transforming youth-driven television and culture for ages 18 to 34. And our job is to use our network superpowers for good. And with that, we decided to create a program that is a 90-minute workshop series piloted for over 2 years in collaboration with 13 different social justice nonprofit partners, where we did an examination of ourselves, our 40-year legacy in this storytelling space, and said, you know what, we did not always get it right. Let's pick apart where we got it right and determine collectively what we can do to put it all together in a way that embraces nuance, embraces shattering stereotypes, and really highlights joy and resilience that we find is not often shared with diverse communities. And so with this culture orientation program, We're working with talent, with all of our production company partners, and this is going to be a mandatory training that's going to spread across the entire industry. And it's going to be the responsibility of anyone working with MTV or any of our networks to embrace this training and to commit to having diversity in front of and behind the camera, to make sure that we are highlighting stories that often go untold, but that the people telling those stories are reflective of those that we're seeing in front of the camera, so that those nuances and those stereotypes don't continue to exist, and so that Kevin can now return many years later on the set of Real World Homecoming and have a completely different experience and talk about where he's grown, but the brand has grown, and his experience on set as well. When looking at a female-driven production team now, I know Kevin can share a bit more, but in his past experiences, there were no women on set, right? And so looking at parity and representation is key to this culture orientation that's now going to be mandatory for everyone working with MTV, and that's all of our internal staffers, our talent, and our third-party production company partners.
So Kevin, author of 15 books.
Yes.
Human rights, yeah, clap for that.
Thank you.
Human rights activist. You have continued to take this kind of mission and journey throughout your entire career, but just your life. And so tell us why it's important to make the connection between media consumption
Yeah.
and societal habits, and why that recognition of the connection is so important based on your experience at Real World, but and beyond.
Well, you know, and thank you both for having me here. And Melissa, you said it so eloquently. I just want to build on what she just said. So 30 years ago, literally May 21st of this year was 30 years ago, we did the very first season of The Real World. We are not responsible for reality TV. I want to make that very clear. We are responsible for our season. But, you know, I had been in college, I had gone to college, and I had decided as a young person that I wanted to be a writer. And as a black person, as an African American, it was very important to me that I was someone who could engage in balancing out the stories that we see out there. And honestly, I did The Real World because I was picked. I got, quote unquote, discovered in New York City. And I said to myself, well, two things. To your point, Melissa, I don't want to portray these stereotypes that we have seen historically of black people in TV and film. But when I think back on it, you know, you said it eloquently. There were hardly any women at all. Women weren't even allowed to be a camera person on the set. There were no women camera persons. I want you to think about that for a second. In 1992, there was one black person, one black woman, Erica Henderson, who was behind the scenes, and that was it. And so it wasn't just me, all of us, honestly. You know, the fact that Heather B., who's one of our great rappers and media personalities, her father was literally left out of the show. What was played was the fact that I didn't have a father, but what about this other person who's black who had a father? We filmed him. I actually was with them, and that was left out. But to your point, Melissa, which is important, you know, when we were asked to do the reunion episodes, and I want to shout out Bahare Kamali. She's not here, but she's one of your executives at Viacom CBS Paramount. Oh yeah, I have to give her a shout out. She's incredible. You know, a woman of color, a woman, because again, what has shifted for Viacom CBS since those 30 years, and I didn't just do The Real World, I also actually worked on a documentary film about LA right after the rebellion in LA, and so I had an experience working in the building and it was striking to me to see women in leadership positions in different ways, women of color in leadership positions, so you can see that there was a conscious shift in the company. And so when we talk about change, it's like, are we willing to realize that, okay, certain people are not at the table, their voices are not at the table. And because I was able to have a conversation with Bahare, I was able to express honestly, look, this is not just how I felt as a black person, but Norman, you know, happy pride to folks out there, Norman, who is openly gay, was reduced to being bisexual because there was this fear that, oh, he can't be gay, he has to just be bisexual, you know what I mean? And so it was like a lot of things that the 7 of us wanted to talk about, and Bahare listened to us. And she brought that back to the other folks who are in leadership at Viacom CBS, now Paramount, and that's why I feel the reunion episodes are very different, because it was important to us to be seen as whole human beings. Does that make sense to you all? You know what I mean? And so when we talk about creating stories for people, you know, whether they're black, white, Latinx, Asian, Native American, disabled, lesbian, gay, queer, bisexual, transgender, non-binary, non-gender conforming, all the identities, are they actually represented as whole human beings in this space? Now, was I actually angry back then? Yeah, absolutely. With good reason, but I also had other things going on, but what became the stuff that was put out there, which reinforced stereotypes. And what I'm proud of, I need to say this too, Because of streaming, literally this morning, every day I get messages from people on social media saying, I just watched the reunion episodes of The Real World. I realized now, they're connecting the dots from the reunion episodes back to the original episode 1992 and saying, now I understand, especially in light of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, all the stuff that's happening. And the thing I say to all of you and anyone listening is it should not take Breonna Taylor getting killed or George Floyd being killed on video for folks to understand, just like for me as a heterosexual man, it shouldn't take women saying me too or a queer person saying homophobia, transphobia for me to understand that this is my issue as well. And so I think the point that we've made with our work around Real World, the reunion episodes and the original one episodes, is that this is actually all of us together and we're in this together, and if people are saying my voice needs to be heard, we need to listen to them. Yeah. So thank you both.
Of course. Yeah. I know we had a moment just on the prep call, seeing each other's Zoom squares. We were like, oh, look at the diversity in the bot. It matters. It matters. And you touched on all three elements of the entire content ecosystem, right? Yeah. So it's the content we create, which is the ultimate output of everything, but it's that creative supply chain that powers the content. So from our partners to our vendors to our talent, to the actual culture that underpins every single thing that we do. And so it's when you have a systems approach to how you think about change as it relates to storytelling and narrative shifts, the hope is that you create a space for a sustainable growth as an organization and something that you can continue to iterate on, because we're not perfect, right? None of us are perfect in this space, but you have to have the willingness to engage in a way that is authentic and real. No pun intended on that. Okay, so Melissa, I know in looking at the cultural orientation and the work that you're doing, how is it when you're trying to bring talent into the fold and have these conversations, showrunners into the fold and have these conversations? Have you hit any walls there, and what guidance, really, could you give the audience around how to have these conversations in a way that are productive but then help to move the needle in the organization?
Absolutely. Each of those groups speaks a very different language. I've had some quite comedic episodes as we piloted the culture orientation rollout, but every voice is equally as important. And so for me, it was taking the time to go on a listening tour. It's an investment, time is money, money is power, but listening at the onset is one of the key ways to avoid hiccups down the road. And so for me, it was making sure that individually, by cast and by person, I spoke to them to find out what was important to them, what were some of their past experiences, and how, as Paramount, we could rectify and move forward. And so once that was done, it was important to work with nonprofit partners who really are subject matter experts. They know this space more than so many of us, and I know many in this room are social impact leaders, and you know how much coalition building really matters to the work that we do. So whether it was GLAAD, ADL, Color of Change, it was bringing them to the table to push the needle, to advise us, to make us uncomfortable when they were viewing our content, to say, you know what, this doesn't work here, and let me explain to you why.
Yeah.
And then on my end, taking that and saying, you know what, we're not just going to package this up with a bow as if we knew it. We're going to bring our viewers on the journey as well by creating collateral material that helps to explain why we made a decision to depict a story in a particular way, and giving them an opportunity to unpack and learn more and grow, just as I did too.
Yeah. Kevin, what role do you think the actual content creators or even the talent have in being proactive and having a voice in the storytelling process? What advice could you give, and how have you experienced that journey?
Well, I think one of the best examples is from our reunion episodes that we taped last year, which is streaming on Paramount. That's our commercial, streaming on Paramount right now.
Download the app. Okay.
John Murray,
Yep.
co-founder of Buna Murray, which brought The Real World to MTV back in the 90s, came out with George Shore, who we also love, our original producers, and they literally sat there and they apologized specifically to Heather B. for cutting her father out of the original episodes of the show. And it really, Heather's father has since died. He died in the last 10 years or so, but it was a very powerful moment because they recognize, their blind spot 30 years ago, which is we're perpetuating this stereotype as content creators that black fathers don't exist, that black men are not in the household at all, which we know is not true. There are black fathers out there. I thought it was a very powerful moment, and not just for us as a cast sitting there, but for TV, for people out there to see something like this, because how often do you get someone saying, we made a mistake and you were right about this? And I think that content creators got to think about this. And so I say to all of you out there, we don't have to agree on everything politically, but for me, personally, I can't support racism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, classism, ableism, anything that is stereotyping or perpetuating the hatred of people. We also understand the responsibility of us as content creators, and I'm one myself, is I grew up with an educational system, as wonderful as my education may have been, I didn't learn anything about black people, about Latinx people, about women of any background, about the LGBTQ plus community, about disabled folks. And so maybe if my education is a little blind there, I need to really think about, well, who do I have in a room? And so I think it's important, do I have people who are diverse as a part of my team, as my leadership, who are saying, hey, to a certain company, you may not want to put out this Juneteenth product or this Pride product. You know what I mean? This is not a good idea to have Pride ice cream or Juneteenth ice cream. Do y'all feel what I'm saying? If you're really serious about social change. So I think that you have to ask yourself, who are we listening to? And we can't just be so stuck in whatever privilege that we have that we don't have the ability to listen to people whose voices are different than ours. What's the point of having them at the table if you're not willing to listen to them?
Yeah. Agreed. And again, being on the corporate side, being in a position where you're willing to not only hear that, but you're willing to take action.
Exactly.
Right? And being comfortable taking that action and acknowledging where you were and where you've grown to be. So in all of the work that has happened over the course of 10 plus years, what do you hope to achieve, Kevin? I'm going straight to you. What do you hope to achieve? What's your ultimate goal in short? Why did you come back to do The Real World? What do you want to portray to your audiences, and what do you hope to achieve from all of the work?
That's such a great question. Viacom, CBS, now Paramount made me feel safe and respected, starting with Bahare. Got to shout her out again. The conversations that we had, I said, okay, I can do this because I feel like this time I'm going to be heard as a whole human being. And it wasn't just, I want to make it clear, it wasn't just about me, it was about the whole 7 of us. It's 7 of us, you know what I mean? And whether we had arguments or not, that's fine. We see ourselves as family. There'd be no reality TV if it wasn't for the first 7 of us. We're very clear about that. And so I wanted to make sure that all of us felt comfortable and safe in that space. And I think that goes for all of us. Do the people who work with you, the work that you're doing, do people feel like they're respected, they're honored? And that's why it didn't stop with The Real World. I'm doing other projects, as you know, with Melissa, with Viacom CBS, because this is a space that I can see the evolution of. And I say this to you all, I said this in an interview when we were doing The Real World reunion last year with LA Times. I don't believe in cancel culture, I believe in counsel culture. But when I say counsel culture, are you willing to listen to the things that need to be changed? You know what I mean? So.
Melissa, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would add to that. As a company, our ethos has been counsel culture, but our baseline is do no harm. And so that has boundaries, that has limits. And there are things where we are talking about portraying violent acts and anything that's sensitive around particular communities that we're just not going to go there anymore. We took cops off the air many years ago because we realized, this is not doing justice to communities. This is pointing people in the wrong direction as it comes to portrayals of particular communities that cops is highlighting. So we're just not going to go there anymore. And I think, like you're saying, Kevin, it is now the responsibility for all of us to see these are areas where we can learn and grow, to take responsibility for it, and to hold each individual to task for the role that they play and the product and the content that they're putting out.
Yeah. So one of the things that is a key element of Content for Change is research and insights and partnerships. And you mentioned partnerships. Again, we can't do it alone. We need to bring some partners along the way. You listed a bunch of the partners that are connected to the cultural orientation. How has that process been? How do we bring our partners into the fold so that we can go on this, what we like to call a shared journey together? The research that we're undergoing through Content for Change, our hope is to open source it to the entire industry, again, because we're not precious about the research. We just want change.
Yeah.
We just want change. So talk to us about bringing partners into the fold and what that looks like and how that journey has been.
Yeah, I think the journey starts with being curious, you know?
Yeah.
People often look at corporate as having the big wallet and being the big bad wolf who's going to bully their way through. But that's not the case with Paramount. That's not what we prioritize in our partnership areas of growth and our coalition building. So for me, it's making sure that I'm humble enough and my team is humble enough to recognize where the gaps are that our partners fill, and looking to them to really illuminate the subject areas that they know near and dear, that they put their hearts and heads on the line for every single day. And whether that's in LGBTQ representation or in disability rights or in criminal justice reform, making sure that we take each of those learning lessons back to our production teams to implement. It's like going to college all over again. You as a production team are going to sit in criminal justice 101 before you start casting, before you start filming, because we know that all of the lessons that our partners are going to impart is going to influence the story that you begin to tell. That goes worldwide. And so it's a great responsibility that we hold dearly to, and that our partners help us share and to tell these accurate portrayals that are so necessary.
Yeah, because it's not a one-off, right? Like you may have learned something 5 years ago that has completely changed with cultural nuances, you know, today. So it's an iterative process.
Yes,
it's an ongoing process. It's a shared journey, and one that we truly do want to kind of penetrate the entire ecosystem so that we can attack it from all angles.
Absolutely.
Did you have anything to add?
Listen to young people, listen to young people, listen to young people. We were young, we are out of time. We were young when we did the show back in the 1990s. And in spite of some folks who were there then at Viacom and CBS, which is a very different team of people now, what I'm proud of is that it forced conversations around race, around gender identity. In spite of what some folks were afraid of, it reached the masses of people out there. You can tell by all the responses we get for the streaming. So it's important to listen to the voices of young people, have them at the table as well, especially folks 30 and under, 25 and under. I just need to say that. It can't just be people 40 and 50 years old making all these decisions. It's got to be multicultural and multi-generational, the approach to social impact. So I just need to say that.
That's great. So with that, we are out of time, but we appreciate you having this conversation with us. I encourage you to join us on this Content for Change journey. It is a shared journey, and we look forward to continuing the dialogue.